Are you absolutely certain about this?
Daniel Cole had learned, over the last 3 years, exactly how much a man could lose without losing his life. He had lost his wife to a car accident on a rain-slicked highway when their daughter Maya was only 4 years old. He had lost his job as a mechanical engineer when the firm he worked for collapsed under a wave of layoffs that swept through the industry like a plague. He had lost his savings to hospital bills that piled up faster than he could ever have imagined. And eventually he had lost the modest house he and his wife had bought together, the one with the little garden where Maya used to chase butterflies in the summer. What he had not lost, through all of it, was his daughter, and he had promised himself the day she was born that no matter what happened to him, she would always have a roof over her head and food on her table, even if it meant swallowing every ounce of pride he had left. That was how, on a gray Tuesday morning, Daniel found himself standing outside the gleaming glass tower of Holbrook Industries, dressed in the cleanest clothes he owned, holding a folder with a resume that listed a mechanical engineering degree and years of experience designing industrial systems, applying for a position as a night shift janitor. He had seen the listing online 3 days earlier and had almost scrolled past it out of sheer embarrassment, but rent was due in 11 days and his unemployment benefits had run out the month before. Pride, he had come to understand, was a luxury reserved for people who didn't have a 7-year-old daughter depending on them for everything. He walked into the building's employment office with his head held as high as he could manage, filled out the application, and was told to come back Thursday for an interview with the facility's supervisor. The interview itself was brief and almost clinical. A tired-looking man named Roger from building operations flipped through Daniel's application without much interest, asked a few basic questions about availability and physical capability, and seemed mildly surprised that someone with an engineering background was applying for cleaning work, though he didn't press the matter. Roger explained that the night janitorial staff was responsible for cleaning the executive floors of the building after hours, including the top floor where the CEO's office was located, a detail he mentioned almost as an afterthought while making a note in his file. Daniel was hired on the spot, starting the following Monday, at a wage that would barely cover his family's basic needs but was, at that point, more than he had earned in over a year. He thanked Roger sincerely, shook his hand, and walked out of that building feeling a strange mixture of relief and quiet humiliation that he would carry with him all week. His first 2 weeks on the job were uneventful in the way that most physically exhausting, mind-numbing work tends to be. He learned the routes through the building, memorized which floors needed extra attention, and grew accustomed to the strange solitude of cleaning empty offices at 11 o'clock at night while the rest of the city slept. He kept his head down, spoke little to his co-workers beyond polite greetings, and focused entirely on doing his job well and getting home in time to get Maya ready for school in the morning after only a few hours of sleep. His mother-in-law, a kind but frail woman named Evelyn who lived 2 blocks away, helped watch Maya during the overlapping hours when Daniel's schedule didn't quite align with school pickup, and between the two of them they managed to keep the fragile machinery of their lives running, just barely. It was on a Thursday night, nearly a month into the job, that everything changed. Daniel had been assigned, for the first time, to clean the top-floor executive suite, a task usually reserved for a more senior staff member who had called in sick. He rode the elevator up in silence, his cleaning cart rattling softly beside him, and stepped out into a hallway so quiet and so opulent that it felt like stepping into another world entirely, all dark wood paneling and soft recessed lighting and framed photographs of the company's history lining the walls. He worked methodically, emptying trash bins, wiping down glass conference tables, vacuuming plush carpet that probably cost more per square foot than his entire apartment, until he reached the final door at the end of the hallway, a heavy set of frosted glass doors with a brass nameplate that read simply, in elegant engraved letters, Holbrook Industries, Office of the Chief Executive Officer. He pushed the door open expecting an empty office, as had been the case every other night he'd cleaned executive spaces, but instead he found the CEO herself still there, seated behind a massive desk, illuminated by the soft glow of a single desk lamp, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a stack of documents. Daniel froze in the doorway, immediately apologizing and beginning to back out, explaining that he hadn't realized anyone was still in the building at this hour and that he could come back later to finish the floor. But the woman looked up at him, and in that instant, something shifted in her expression, a flicker of recognition passing across her face so quickly that Daniel almost missed it. She removed her glasses slowly, staring at him with an intensity that made him distinctly uncomfortable, and asked, in a voice that was suddenly much quieter than before, what his name was. He told her, somewhat confused by the question, that his name was Daniel Cole. The woman, whose name played on the desk read Vanessa Holbrook, went completely still, her pen slipping from her fingers and rolling silently off the edge of the desk. She asked him, her voice now trembling slightly in a way that seemed entirely at odds with the composed, powerful figure she had appeared to be just moments earlier, whether he had once worked at Ferris Dynamics, the engineering firm where he'd been employed before the layoffs. Daniel, increasingly bewildered, confirmed that he had, wondering how on earth this billionaire CEO would know anything about his previous employment. Vanessa Holbrook stood up from her desk slowly, walked around to the front of it, and looked at him as though she were seeing a ghost, before finally saying words that would append everything Daniel thought he understood about his life and his past. She told him that 11 years ago, before she had built Holbrook Industries into the empire it now was, she had been a struggling engineering graduate student with almost no money, working part-time and drowning in debt, desperately trying to finish a prototype for a water filtration system that could have saved her from dropping out of her program entirely. She explained that on the worst night of that struggle, when her equipment had failed catastrophically and she had been on the verge of giving up entirely, a young engineer working late in the same shared lab space had stayed until 4 a.m. helping her troubleshoot the system, refusing any payment, refusing even to give his full name, saying only that he remembered what it felt like to almost lose everything and didn't want to see someone else go through that alone. That young engineer, she said, staring at Daniel with tears now visible in her eyes, had been him. Daniel stood in stunned silence, memories slowly surfacing from over a decade earlier, faint and distant but unmistakably real once she described the details. He remembered a graduate student, exhausted and nearly in tears over a malfunctioning filtration prototype, working alone in a university lab late at night. He remembered helping her recalibrate a sensor array that had been improperly wired, staying far longer than he'd intended because he simply couldn't bring himself to leave someone in such obvious distress. He remembered, vaguely, that she had asked for his name and he had brushed off the question, embarrassed by the attention, wanting nothing more than to help and go home. He had never thought about that night again in the years that followed, had never imagined it had mattered to anyone beyond that single sleepless evening, and certainly never imagined that the desperate graduate student he'd helped would go on to build one of the most successful technology companies in the country. Vanessa explained, her composure slowly returning even as her voice remained thick with emotion, that the filtration system he had helped her fix that night had become the foundation of her company's first successful patent, the very innovation that had launched Holbrook Industries from a struggling startup into a billion-dollar enterprise. She told him she had spent years afterward trying to track down the anonymous engineer who had saved her academic career and, by extension, everything she had built since, but with no name and no contact information, her search had eventually gone cold, and she had reluctantly accepted that she might never be able to thank him properly. And now, she said, staring at him with an expression somewhere between disbelief and overwhelming gratitude, that same man was standing in her office at 11 o'clock at night, wearing a janitor's uniform, emptying her trash bins. Daniel, overwhelmed and unsure how to respond to any of this, tried to explain his circumstances honestly: the layoffs, his wife's death, the mounting bills and the desperate need to provide for his daughter, and how the janitorial position had simply been the only work available to him when he needed it most. He spoke without self-pity, simply stating facts, because after everything he had endured over the past 3 years, he had grown accustomed to speaking plainly about his hardships without expecting sympathy from anyone. Vanessa listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to something that looked distinctly like resolve, and when he finished speaking, she told him, in a tone that left no room for argument, that a man with his skills and his character had absolutely no business cleaning offices at midnight, and that she intended to make sure that never happened again. Over the following days, Vanessa Holbrook moved with the kind of swift, decisive action that had made her one of the most respected executives in the industry. She personally reviewed Daniel's engineering background, his old project records, and even reached out to former colleagues at Ferris Dynamics who confirmed what she had already begun to suspect: that Daniel had been one of the most talented and reliable engineers the company had ever employed before the layoffs swept through indiscriminately. She created a position for him within Holbrook Industries' Research and Development Division, one that matched his qualifications and paid him a salary that would finally allow him to move Maya and himself into a proper home, one with a small yard where she could run and play the way she used to before their lives had been appended. Daniel accepted the position with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief that took weeks to fully settle into something resembling normalcy. He threw himself into the work with the same quiet dedication he had once shown as a graduate researcher helping a stranger in a university lab, and within months he had become an integral part of a project team developing next-generation infrastructure systems for developing communities around the world, work that felt meaningful in a way that emptying trash bins, however necessary it had been at the time, never could. Vanessa checked in on him periodically, not out of obligation but out of genuine interest in his progress, and slowly, over the following year, what began as an extraordinary coincidence blossomed into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared history. Maya, for her part, noticed the change in her father almost immediately, the way his shoulders seemed to carry less weight, the way he smiled more easily at the dinner table, the way their new apartment felt like a home rather than a temporary shelter from hardship. She didn't fully understand the details of what had happened, only that her father had helped someone a long time ago without expecting anything in return, and that kindness, even when it seemed to disappear into the void of an ordinary night, had eventually found its way back to them when they needed it most. Daniel made sure to tell her the full story eventually, sitting with her on the small balcony of their new apartment on a quiet evening, wanting her to understand that the world, despite everything it had taken from them, still had room in it for grace and unexpected justice. A year after that fateful night in the executive office, Hallbrook Industries held its annual gala celebrating the company's achievements, and Daniel found himself standing in a ballroom filled with some of the most influential names in the technology industry, wearing a tailored suit that fit him for the first time in years, watching as Vanessa took the stage to deliver her keynote address. Midway through her speech, she paused, looked directly at Daniel across the room, and told the assembled crowd the story of the anonymous engineer who had saved her career over a decade earlier, revealing for the first time publicly that she had finally found him, and that he was now leading one of the most promising divisions within her company. The room erupted in applause, and Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the attention and everything to do with the quiet, vindicating knowledge that every hardship he had endured had not erased the man he truly was, only tested him, and that in the end, the kindness he had shown a stranger so many years ago had circled back to save him exactly when he needed saving most. Looking back on everything now, Daniel understood that the lowest point of his life, standing in a janitor's uniform in an executive office he never expected to enter, had actually been the doorway to his family's redemption, though he could never have known it in that moment. He often told Maya, when she asked him about hard times and whether things would ever get better, that kindness was never truly wasted, even when it seemed to vanish without a trace, because somewhere, in ways too complex and mysterious to predict, it found its way back around. He no longer carried the quiet shame he once felt walking into that building each night, because he had learned, in the most unexpected way imaginable, that dignity was never determined by the job someone held, but by the character they carried with them regardless of circumstance, and that character, in the end, was the one thing life's hardships could never fully take away.